We will go into the first session on how to rethink, and this is about rethinking urban governance. How can governance be rethought through improving and restructuring relationships and processes among governance stakeholders in order to ensure that decision-making that will help us to achieve just cities. So this session will have two parts, as I understand it. At least this was what was planned some days ago. Looking at governance innovations generally to achieve just cities and considering the case of Gothenburg in depth. And I would like to invite to the stage all three partners of this conversation. This conversation will not have any chair, so it will be moderated in between you. You will interview each other. And very welcome, Professor Beth Perry, Mikael Cullberg, and Margareta Forsberg. You have already met two of the discussion panelists yesterday, but for you who weren't here, I will shortly introduce each one of them. Mikael Cullberg is, as you might know by now, the director of the Gothenburg platform. He's an economist and linguist with a civil service background. This includes a post as the senior advisor to the governor of Västra Götaland, and prior to this, posts at the Ministry of Agriculture, Finance and Environment, at the Prime Minister's Office, and at the National Fishery Agency, and at National Agriculture Agency. Mikael has also worked within the EU policy process, with international development cooperation, and with the national budgetary process. So welcome back, Mikael. Beth, who we also saw and introduced yesterday, but a quick introduction. She is the director of the newly constituted Sheffield-Manchester platform, where she has a professorial fellowship in the Faculty of Social Science at the University of Sheffield. And as you understood, until recently, she was the head of the Greater Manchester LIP at the University of Salford. Beth is an interdisciplinary urbanist whose work focuses on co-producing urban transformations and developing pathways to more just, sustainable urban futures. Current writings focus on reflexive, social, scientific knowledge production and the changing relationships between cities and knowledge. And new on the stage is Margareta Forsberg, who has a background, a PhD in social work and a background as a social worker with experience in practice from different planning positions. Her focus is towards preventive work and public health, and she has been the head of research and development at the Swedish National Board of Health and Welfare. Currently, Margareta is the coordinator manager for the City of Gothenburg's program called Ett jämlikt Göteborg, A Fair Gothenburg, which is a municipal program aimed towards enhancing the social sustainability of Gothenburg. Very welcome.
Thank you.
We are going to try and have a three-way interview between us, but we want to kind of try and focus on these questions around urban governance from the point of view of some practical examples of things that are happening in Gothenburg, the experiences of the Gothenburg Local Interaction Platform, and a new project that we've got starting in Greater Manchester called Jam and Justice. Called Jam and Justice, which Alex mentioned yesterday, and our efforts to set up an action research cooperative. So we hope this works, but we thought we'd start just with Margareta just introducing very briefly what socially sustainable Gothenburg is. And then we'll try and pass it between us and hopefully leave some time for you to get engaged in the trialogue as well.
Great. Well, we'll see how it works. Thank you, Natsam, for that introduction about bureaucrats and people in power and elite people trying to change something. Well, maybe I should just go home, you know? What we do in Gothenburg is really that we try, and I want to show you two slides, which are not my slides, but the city's slides. Let's see, no?
Other way. Yeah.
There we are. You saw this picture yesterday. It is the panorama picture of Gothenburg, of course. And what I want you to look at is this little sign here at the bottom. This is the PowerPoint template for the city. And on every presentation that is made by people from the city, we use this template where it says a sustainable city open to the world. I'm not sure that Nazem had been talking to the people who decided to put that device on our template. I'm not sure that they had deconstructed the term and the term of sustainability in all parts when they decided to do it. But I kind of like it because it is something that sets a frame on what we want to do. With all the question marks that you can put on it, it is something that is we're trying, or our politicians and leaders are trying to put the light on sustainability, and I think that is a good thing compared to other things. The political goal is, in the budget document of Gothenburg, we have a political goal since the beginning of this year that Gothenburg shall be an equal city. What that means, you can deconstruct in different ways, of course, too, but it is a kind of forceful and powerful political goal, I think. So this is what we work with, and this is a goal, an aim in the political document that leads the work of the city. It's not a project. It is something that all departments of the organization are supposed to work with. My role in the system is to try to coordinate and help different organizations to see what can our contribution to this be. So these are the two slides that I wanted to frame with when it comes to what do we stand on when we work with sustainability in Gothenburg. And my particular role is social sustainability. Social sustainability is of course very intertwined with the other dimensions of the sustainability device or concept, but this is the part that I play in this game. All right.
Thank you.
I mean, I think that's really interesting, and I'm sort of feeling both inspired and slightly depressed by sort of the paradoxes and tensions that we've been discussing over the last few days. But here we have something really interesting. We don't have a head of coordination for social sustainability back in Greater Manchester. So I'm kind of interested to understand a bit more about, how this role and this space has developed in the first instance, and what sits behind these political grand statements, bearing in mind what we've heard this morning.
Yeah. Well, I think that I started working in the city in 2011, and before me, for instance, Lars, I don't know there you are, had been working on a project or with the aim of trying to get social issues on the agenda for a number of years. I would say that something happened there around 2010 or 11 when it was more and more focus on social issues. We have been having quite a large focus in the city on infrastructural development, with a great train tunnel, for instance, underneath the city, and, well, a lot of infrastructural, technical questions. And the social issues, the inequalities between different parts of the city were just going on somewhere, We have health gaps between different parts of the city. 7 or 9 years of life expectancy is the difference between different parts. And this was something that was just going on, but the focus was on infrastructure. So we tried to put this on the agenda, and I think that then from 2013, we've had goals in the political budget that are really revolving around the issue of social sustainability. And from 2016, they have been put these goals and aims together in this Gothenburg shall be an equal city. And we have the same goal in the budget for 2017. We also are talking about, of course, the time aspect, that we need to have this for a long time. Yeah.
Hey, is this sort of another mainstreaming exercise, like gender mainstreaming or we started out with environment assessment analysis, and then we have other aspects that go across policy areas. So is this just another aspect that needs to go across policy, another perspective?
Yeah.
Or is this different from other mainstreaming exercises?
Haven't thought about it that way, but I think it's well, maybe it is a mainstream exercise that we have to focus on social issues, regardless of what organization or what department we work in. When it comes to the city districts, departments and organizations they have their focus on social issues, on schooling, on welfare, and so on. And in a way, it's been their business. So when we work with city planning or with traffic planning or with other kinds of heavy planning, infrastructural planning, we don't discuss the social issues very much. And I think this is something that is changing now. We have a lot of engagement, actually, or increasing engagement, I would say, from these departments. They're more and more interested in social issues in their planning.
I'm kind of interested in who the we is, because you said we're driving this, but we've talked a lot about, well, who's really setting the agenda and who's benefiting. And can you say a bit more about who is the we? Where has this come from? And you sort of talk about mainstreaming, but it occurs to me that how is this agenda actually seen? Is it just something that can be politically talked about to avoid difficult questions, or is there something that's really kind of sitting underneath it with some real capacity to try and drive a different kind of city? So that's too many questions. I do that sometimes.
Right.
There's this and there's this and there's this. Maybe just the first
And
one.
I think, I think that, what was the last thing you said? You said, is this just...
Who's setting the agenda and who benefits?
Yeah,
That
all
was
right.
the first one.
All right. But don't forget that last question that you were asking, because I like that one. I want to say something about it. So far, the city has been setting the agenda, and the town organization, the politicians. But there is an agreement, a formal agreement between the city of Gothenburg and civil society organizations about cooperation, about how we can work together and how we will be able to work together. And there is an ambition, and I would say an increasing ambition, to talk with other stakeholders and to do common, to share planning processes. But it's really not an easy quick fix. It's really something that we have to work on. We don't have the methods, we don't have the habits of doing this. How do we do it? How do we do it without, these are not made for short people, They're really uncomfortable, Yeah, I think I'll stand instead.
Good.
Don't worry with them.
Yeah, I think...
I'll sit, you stand.
Yeah, puts us on the same level, right? It's not a quick fix to try to find ways to work together. There is even a cooperation council in Gothenburg between the city and civil society organizations. It's been having difficulties to find its role and its ways of working, but it's there, and we are together, the two parties together are working on how can we develop this so that it really can mean something in the city. We also have, when it comes to civil society organizations, Sweden, I think we have been talking quite a little about the different contexts that our countries provide us with. The civil societies organizations have a different role in Sweden compared to the UK and the African countries, where the public sector took over very much of what the civil society sector was doing in the middle of the 20th century. And now we want to work a lot more with them again. We have a history where well, you shouldn't come and work with the welfare system because you're just based on charity, and charity is, in a way, a kind of oppressing way of looking at people. You shouldn't come, this is the public sector's responsibility. And now we have a situation where we want to work together with the civil society organizations again. So how do we do that in another way? Not going back to charity, because when the public sector took over this great part, I think it was based on a thought of human rights. You shouldn't be depending on charity. You should be the society should provide you with your human rights. And now when we want to work together with civil society organizations again, how do we do that? Not going back to the charity type of institutions, but doing it another way. And there I think we do also have some examples. Not very many. We have to work on this for a number of years, I think, before we get to where we want to go. But we do agreements of different kinds with civil society organizations on, for instance, the refugee situation. How can we work together on this? EU migrants who are coming to our city, how can the civil society organizations help out? And they are, and we have agreements, and we make contracts with organizations. So there are examples. I would say that governance is something that we have to develop more, because when you ask me about who is driving the project, the work, it is very much the city. And we have a cooperation board of high executives from the city. We are so happy that it's not just city district leaders, but it's leaders from other parts, from the municipal companies, for instance, and from the city planning office and so on in this group. So we widened it, but we didn't widen it to other parties of the city.
I think that's what's really interesting, because we think about what we heard from Nazim this morning, and change doesn't come from above. This sounds really kind of top down, and then there's all these issues over, well, how does the notion of equality relate to the notion of justice, and when you're talking about who's included and who's excluded. One of the interesting things that came through our session yesterday in the breakout session was the sort of Swedish concern at the moment with where do you exclude in order to be fair, to create spaces for marginalised voices to be heard properly. And if everybody is in every conversation, then is that worse? Is that actually unjust? And I can sort of see all of these tensions. I don't know whether you're talking about those things. But I mean, I guess particularly this question of the top-down and how civil society is actually involved in the process of socially sustainable Gothenburg. Because one of the things that concerns me in the work that we're doing is, yes, there's an opportunity to talk about co-production, but it aligns itself with a restructuring of the state, with cuts in public funding, with the idea that actually co-production is just about trying to devolve responsibilities, and that it becomes an excuse, a kind of backdoor for other kinds of ways of working. So, this is all really dangerous, isn't it? How do you think about that, or do you even talk about it?
I think we should be talking about it more, right? But I do. We are talking about it, and we are talking about it with the representatives from the civil societies also. But I think we have quite a long way to walk. It is a top-down project in a way, because it comes. If you think about the democratic system, the politicians in the city are elected by the population in the city, so they are representatives from the population, and then they give us this assignment, and we try to work with it as best we can. Also trying to find new ways of democratic discussion forums for us. But of course it's always, when you try to do something and you have your position in a organization like a city, town town organization. It's not a platform for activism, really. No. So, but you can work with and try to take what do you say? To listen to different kinds of activists and try to make that part of the discussion. And I think that is what we are trying to do. Yeah, but
well, I think we should keep the activism thing live and hand it to urban knowledge and urban change to pick up as we go through. But I mean, the other thing that I think is really interesting was this mainstreaming question, and how you're really perceived. Are you just filling a political niche so you can be said to be doing something, or are you really being supported to try and push this through?
I think there is a great ambition among the politicians to. I mean, when they formulate a goal like that, they haven't deconstructed the words in all their parts, but they do have an ambition to do something else, right? So, and yes, there is funding to.
I see one sign of some political courage anyway, and that's social housing, which is a taboo concept in Sweden. Social housing is a 4-letter word in Sweden, because our system was good housing, affordable housing for everyone, with no discrimination of income. In my mind, that system was abolished in 1991, but it dies very slowly in the minds of people. So that in other cities, you can't talk about social housing, but in Gothenburg, you're actually talking about introducing designated low-rent flats for people with low income.
Yeah.
I think that takes some political courage in Sweden.
Yeah, yeah, it absolutely does. And when I meet people from other cities in the country, they think that the budget that we have, which is very much based on equality, our politicians are writing about equality and fairness in almost every part of the budget document, which is the steering document. And when I meet people from other cities in the country, they think it is very, very radical. So that is also something to make notion of.
I think that's really interesting because it's about what's innovative in the context that you're working in. So for you, that's like a governance innovation, even if we can say it could be more, it could be different. Have you done this?
Could always be more.
You're trying to do something differently in that space. I don't know, I like this idea of political courage. Does something like GoLip and everything that's happening there give you that political courage? How do you see, or has there been a relationship here between the social sustainability Gothenburg and GoLip?
Oh yeah, there has been connections. I think we could develop those connections more because I think that there is more to find and to develop together. We've had this a large project on social issues based at the GoLip, which has been trying to find ways of working more closely together with not only civil society organizations, but with residents and the greater Gothenburg. I really liked what you were saying yesterday about the difference between methods and ethos, because that is something that is, we try to work with different methods, and I think that there are methods that are supporting dialogue more and a more equal dialogue between different parties. But if it's not based in an ethos, then it's just manipulation, I think. And I think that we also have, we have a long way to go, absolutely. But we have a starting point that I really like. Okay, but we have a long way to go. And what was I thinking about? About methods and ethos. I'll come back to that.
But yeah, so I mean, maybe we should move across to GoLip because you're sort of trying to innovate within your existing institutions, and in some of the writings on the Just City, it says about there being a lot of focus about these absolute concepts of justice, but it doesn't necessarily help existing institutions work out what they should try and do differently. And so Susan Feinstein, who was mentioned yesterday, makes precisely this point. What do existing institutions do? How do you catch this? So you're trying within your context, and is that something that GoLip can or has helped with? And you're in a different kind of governance innovation space because you're in between.
Yeah, because the system that you're describing that was set up within the city, it's a lot to do about government rather than governance. It's still within the city administration. It's politically led. It's within the boundaries of Gothenburg. So if you cross the street into Mölndal, it's not a just city because it's not their political priority. So
they're out.
They're out, and it's literally across the street. You just cross the street, and the street signs look different, and then you're not in Gothenburg anymore. So the regional aspect is very interesting. At the platforms, now we've been trying to get these different entities to meet, so different parts of the public system, and research institutes. So far, that's as far as we've got, really. Practice in the form of the public organization, the public sector organizations, and research. It's, as I said yesterday, it has taken a very long time, and it's much more difficult than you would have thought. When I try to explain to friends or anyone else who's asking me what I do, what GoLip is and Mistra and Futures, I talk about this collaboration, this fantastic thing that we get people from different walks of life, different organizations in the same room, actually talking to each other about real things and understanding each other. They all seem to think that, well, don't you always do that? What is new? Shouldn't you be isn't that natural that you should talk to each other? So it's difficult.
So you mean it's just like doing the obvious things that we know we should be doing anyway?
Yes. We're trying to actually do what we say that we should be doing, that we always said we should be doing. It's fiendishly difficult.
Well, you've got the biggest challenge because you're the biggest platform, you've got the most partners, you're holding together the sort of relationship with the funder as well. I mean, how have you, like in very practical terms, tried to manage all these different priorities from all the different organisations you put up when you think about GoLip and how it develops?
Well, there's 10 organisations. We really need to meet all the time. We need to meet regularly at executive level to get a buy-in from the leadership. We need to meet at a more operational level regularly. So I see the 10 organizations at least once a month for half a day. And we always have more to talk about than we can possibly do in 3 hours. So there's a constant sort of management system of actually trying to listen to each and every one of the partners, what their priorities are, what their challenges are, what they want to achieve. And they are quite different. Their objectives are, if you sort of go down from the impact level of peace on earth, and you sort of get down to the real objectives from day to day, they are very different. The time scales are different. Researchers and research want to dig and to develop their field. Civil servants like us, we need the quick fixes all the time. And we need to do the best we can with best available knowledge today, tomorrow, next week. So to get these different time frames together it needs constant management and discussion. And also balancing all these interests so that we set up projects that sort of covers where the common denominators are.
I guess that one of the things that's interesting is about how you sort of structure and manage that space. So that the different organisations can find a way of working together. But how do they also then take that back into their organisations? Because if we're thinking about how do you rethink governance, how can we actually have appropriate structural conditions? Appropriate, I don't really know what that means either, but that some of these ideas can start to permeate through. We need fundamental cultural change within organisations as well. We said yesterday, it's not just the university. I mean, how does that kind of work? Who's doing that translation in the partnership?
That is the big issue, really. I mean, we've created this neutral space. I think we really have created somewhere where researchers and practice people, or whatever you call them, can step out of their regular structures and be allowed to think differently. But then these structures are still there. So that when we think up when we produce new knowledge together, we produce new ideas, new ways of working. These need to be implemented, absorbed by these structures. And these are structures that were not built to work on solutions or knowledge like that. Because bureaucracies need to be structured, they are siloed. They need to decide things, to implement things, and the political system needs a silo organization. So they're not actually set up to take on what we do. So setting up the neutral space is great, but where do we go from there? Do we need to change research? Do we need to change the structures?
I'm kind of bothered by this word. Sorry, go on, Margareta.
No, I think that the logics of the different organizations is also different, because the logic of the university is very much science, excellence, the individual researchers aims to go further and further and make a career. The aim of the city organization is to try to make a collective good for everybody, in a way. And as you say, we have to work fast in that, and we have to take decisions like that ad hoc when the questions arise. Sometimes I want to go back to university to be able to sit there and deconstruct the different ways and analyze, well, how could we do it instead? And well, maybe one day I do, but there are very different logics, So how can we work together? How can we also use research and educated people from the universities in a way that doesn't get oppressive?
I mean, this theme about this kind of spaces in between existing governance structures is one of the key things we've all been working on.
Yeah.
But I'm kind of intrigued by the idea that any of us feel we can describe them as neutral. They're not neutral.
No.
So people are bringing things and people are taking things. One of the comments, I don't know if they're here, but someone made a really nice comment in our breakout session yesterday that co-production had to be about giving things away, not just taking things. So,
Exactly.
And one of our stakeholders said co-production's compromise in pursuit of a higher purpose. So who's compromising? What's being given? What's being taken? I mean, it's not neutral, is it? And it's only safe, that's the other term people use, safe spaces. It's only safe for some people. It's not necessarily safe for other people. And then, of course, who wants to be safe? We need to be risky, How do we do any of this stuff if we're within our comfort zones? We've got to be uncomfortable and unsettled. How's that playing out?
I think the important thing is to have a space, a different space from the regular one, whether it's more safe or more neutral or less unsafe, but it's a different space. I think that can be catalytical for collaboration between organizations, so that they start thinking in different ways. Because, I mean, yes, the policy process, the administrative process is very rapid, but it's also very slow. So you have these long-term issues, and you need to think about them as well, because otherwise it becomes completely disorganized. So I think all organizations need to allow space for reflection and to develop. And different terminologies are used by different people. There's one group of people that talk about innovation, because they think that if you borrow expressions from enterprise industry, then it's sort of better. So they talk about innovation. Other people use other terminologies, but I think they're all talking about the same thing: finding the space to think about change.
I mean, I think that's really interesting because one of the things that struck me when I started working on some of these issues, I was coming up with these structural diagrams of how governance works. Let's map out all the organisations and who's connected to who, and that's governance. And I remember looking at it at the page and thinking, well, I don't understand that, and it doesn't help me do anything. Because we need to think about kind of governing as a kind of active, continuous process of making the city in real time. And that requires cultural solutions, not structural ones. And I kind of got frustrated with the difficulties of navigating all these institutions. I think it's true what Nazim said earlier on as well about there being such a strong focus on academia policy interactions. And I think for me, we needed to take something a little bit outside of that space, and that's why we've got this other project where we're trying to set up the Action Research Cooperative, because that's really about trying to create another kind of space. But what we're grappling with is how that can be, how we can be responsible and accountable to funders at the same time as not overloading the space with bureaucracy. I mean, what is different, what's qualitatively different about these kinds of spaces that we create? Otherwise, they just become bureaucratic, administrative nightmares. It doesn't matter whether justice is on the paper. If people aren't inspired to be engaged, then you've lost already.
So can you tell us a little bit more about, I mean, substantially what you do at the ARC?
This is, it spun out of Mistra Urban Futures, partly because of what we'd learnt and what was potentially brilliant, but partly also because some of these frustrations of how hard it is to get policy organisations and structures to move. And I kind of felt that there was an opportunity to create a different kind of space that could be held potentially by the university, where we were able to work with civil society organisations and citizen groups. So we came up with this project title, Jam and Justice. So Jam is all around inclusive governance and how decisions get made. How can people participate in decisions that matter to them? And justice is around, for us, it's about a kind of procedural justice, but also recognition and representation. Who gets heard? Whose voices are involved in the policy process? So we decided we'd set up this thing. We're still designing it, but we're not kind of designing it on our own. We're co-designing it with participants around the city region, called the Action Research Cooperative. And the basic idea is that we will, we're at the moment we're recruiting 15 participants from across Greater Manchester to come and join us in making the Action Research Cooperative. I'll call it the ARC from now on, yeah. And we're going to devolve funding to the ARC, so that we will then work as equal participants with those others from civil society to co-design and commission and implement 10 action research projects, which are all designed to try and find different ways of addressing these issues, getting citizens involved in decisions that matter to them and helping different voices being heard. It's interesting, but it's also got its own challenges and issues that we're grappling with. And I think one of them goes back to what we've talked about a lot here, which is this is a lot about process. It's about procedural justice and getting people involved. But at the back of my mind, I am not sure how and to what extent there's a relationship with distributive justice, who actually ends up getting what. Exactly. And I think that's the danger, that these kind of safe spaces potentially become co-opted or normalised or absorbed. Or celebrated but not replicated, because that's the stuff over there. Oh yeah, we're involved over there, so we don't need to do it in here. And I mean, luckily in our team we're pretty reflexive about that, and we've got a process of trying to capture and think about the challenges and hope that we end up in a different place. Did I explain that very well?
Yeah, that sounds okay, because that's what we're worrying about in Gothenburg. One of our projects has been working a lot about with trying to capture social movements, not just the established civil society organisations, but those too, and getting them into the process. Admittedly, I think we're not used to doing that. Well, and we need to find ways to do it. So we'd really like to collaborate on that.
We decided we didn't want to have local authority representatives in the ARC. But we recognise that in order to actually have an impact and be, less than just a nice one-off experiment, we need to have really good pathways or relationships. So we've kind of set up a separate local authority support network where we're going to get representatives of the 10 local authorities together with an agreement that they will listen to what we say, and we will hopefully know how and when to plan to influence the policy agenda and potentially co-design some interventions around particular pinch points where something different could happen. Because the context for all of this is devolution in Greater Manchester. Central government's decided to devolve down to the city region, but the agenda's led by the Treasury. It's really about economic growth. It has lots of potential routes, but there's an ambiguity over whether it's really an opportunity or whether it's actually just more of the same. Because there's no doubt there's loads of kind of symptoms of crisis and really huge injustices and issues in the context of austerity. But devolution doesn't really seem to connect with any of that. And in fact, the structures, the partnerships are really strong. They're quite unbreakable, they're closed, they're elite, So how do you sort of go about having this really fixed governance structure and all these other issues? What kind of spaces do you need in cities to sort of try to unpick that? So small effort, but that's what we're trying to do.
Small effort. I'm reflecting on some words. I just want to talk about them just for a few minutes. The first one is culture and structure. And I think that we have, in Gothenburg, we have a number of examples where we have been trying to do some, to have dialogue processes something is going to change in the city, so how do we address that together in a dialogue with residents? Or we have a problem that we have to address, we do that together with residents. And at some of these dialogue processes, we have reached quite good results. And then maybe some officer is quitting his job or her job, and somebody else is coming in who is not a bearer or a carrier of this culture of dialogue. So it ends. Very abruptly, it ends. And that is, instead of then creating trust and a base to walk on to the next dialogue process, you build in distrust in the city. So there has to be a culture that is carried by everyone, that this is the way of working. I think this is and then when that culture is in place, you have to have a structure to take care of the good ideas and the things that are coming out from these processes. That is one thing that I'm thinking about. And I think culture and structure are very essential also when it comes to innovative types of work. We have to have a culture that makes it possible to think in new ways and not just trying to do the same thing that we always did in a better and better way. So that is culture and structure. The other word I've been thinking about the last couple of weeks is implementation and implementing. Because that is also something that comes from a top-down perspective. I want to implement something in this organization, or we want to, so on. And in a discussion I was in, it was suggested that maybe we should use the word realization instead. So how do we together realize things? I think words are keeping us in old ways of thinking. The words we use, as a linguist, I know you are, I think you agree with me. So I think that is important, that we think about what words do we use and what do they do with us and with our perspectives.
What do you say? Do you think there is anyone out there that would like to ask us something? Yes, I see a hand there, about 10 rows back.
I have a lot of comments, actually, not so many questions. But first of all, I want to say that I love how this day has started, because I feel that we're really talking about realizing just cities, so thank you for that. Second of all, I think in order to make my point, it's important to say that I have recently moved to Sweden, and yes, I now work as a consultant in private sector, but my background is working for an NGO and doing very hands-on projects with urban planning issues for very small budgets. So what I just wanted to say to Margaret, when you were talking about that there is no methods in place, or that you are not really used to working collaboratively with the civil society yet, then I just wanted to make the point that you don't need to figure out the entire system in order to do that. What helps is to just do it project by project and learning by doing. And like this is how you create this culture of co-owned responsibility. And another point that I wanted to make was that if it really seems so that because we need to test, we need to try new things. Because when we talk about realizing just cities, then it has to happen in other places than in offices, seminar rooms, and conferences. It actually has to happen out there, on the streets, in the city. So I'm just saying that if it is so that the city structure is unable to test, because there is restrictions, then maybe the answer is somewhere else. And it might not be even academia, but another kind of middle body. We can talk about it later. But yeah, thank you. And also, I know how hard it is to work with social sustainability issues because it's so incomprehensible. So thank you for doing what you're doing.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Is there someone else?
I'd like to do a comment on that, because we are making projects together with other parties, as I also exemplified. But the city organization consists of 50,000 people. So when I say that we don't have structures in place, I'm talking about the entire organization, because I think we have a lot to do there. I think there was a hand over there.
Hello, I'm Barbara Ekström from Gothenburg City. I work with social perspectives in the development of the new city that we are creating in Gothenburg. I've been looking at this picture behind you during this interesting conversation. As some of you might not know, this is the East Indian ship Gothenburg or Göteborg. It's a replica of a ship that sunk in the harbor of Gothenburg about 250 years ago. But this new one is sailing very good, and it was built in the late 90s and set to sea 2003. This ship was entirely built by people who was really convinced that this could be a wonderful project for Gothenburg. And I would like to ask the panel, do you think that this is a good picture of this kind of other space that we all are reaching for and want to create?
I happen to know that there was quite a lot of government money involved. Unemployed people being employed with government money to do this. Although the Swedish government then denied that they spent any money on it. But yes, there was so I don't know. It's sort of a public civil society collaboration that is a good example of something like that.
Yes, nice to know. And now there are plans to selling it to China.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think we need to wrap up.
Yeah.
We're up to our time, but do you want to share some last, thoughts?
No, I'm done.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've one thing that I worry about is that when we try to start talk to social movements, new initiatives, civil society, the focus tends to be on certain areas of the city, the disadvantaged or exposed or whatever words you use, and we forget how do we talk with the ones that have the most, who are the ones that actually have access to the resources, that benefit from investments, that impact on the environment and the climate the most, the ones that are actually least involved in sustainable development. They are actually unsustainable. It's just a question. I do not have an answer, but it worries me a lot.
Yeah, I agree. And I think just to pick up one of the other points, we've been talking about the city as if we know what it is, that it's an administrative entity that's kind of professionalised and sanitised and belongs to the public organisations, and therefore it's about getting other people involved in the city. And I think we've got to challenge that, because it's everybody's city. What kind of city is it? And I think we need to move beyond thinking of the city just in terms of its administrative footprint.
Absolutely.
And until we sort of challenge that, we can't think about governance differently. And then my response to this would be islands. I think that's the connection. Getting off islands. Finding bridges.
Sure.
Right.
Okay.
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 Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.